Hello everyone, I'm Brian and welcome back. But before we get started, I want to say that I read a lot of the comments, or all the comments so far from the first part of this, and I really do appreciate all. And I do understand that some of the things he says are meant for like very specific questions, or not really meant for general stuff. And and yes, obviously, the indescribable is very difficult to describe. You know who I'm talking about when you made that comment, and it is, and that's the thing that's kind of difficult for me too. That's the reason why it's a bit difficult to understand. There are some things that can be translated as much as possible, and don't get me wrong, sometimes you have to experience it, but I don't know, I like to believe, perhaps it's just me, my stupidity, maybe, ignorance, actually probably that one, that most things can be described. There are probably some things that can't be. I don't know where that boundary is at yet. At the moment, he does a very good job of describing things. Like, I understand the reason for the ornate and the gold, or the altar and the wood. Very good descriptions, honestly, and I think those really work to help solidify descriptions like the dream and stuff. I personally, for me, the dream state is the absolute perfect for me, and I think it'll work for most people because most people have dreams. But also sometimes adding in other descriptors like the theater, the screen and the projector, and the gold and the ornament, the altar and the wood will help them too. But just because of how I think that, when you look at the wave and the water, well, sorry, I'm laughing because I just think too logically, perhaps, and that the fact that in order to cause a wave, there needs to be the wind. Otherwise, a water doesn't have waves without something causing the waves. The screen and the projector, there's two different things there, so it doesn't really work with me personally. But at the same time, I understand the message, which is what they're trying to get through, which is the fact that you are the canvas and the projector is Maya. And these illusions you see are what we are experiencing. In reality, you are the canvas itself, Brahman, and the Maya, the illusions not in Brahman, but projected on Brahman, which is still kind of a very weird way to say it, because, like I said I think in the last ones, that means there's this other object projecting on Brahman. Otherwise, you're going to say Brahman projecting on Brahman, which would make more sense to me. But it is again probably some people confusing because it's like, why is Brahman projected on Brahman? Because there's nothing else other than Brahman. Now you can say that the Brahman projecting on Brahman is Maya. That's what's Maya is called. What is Maya? Brahman projected on Brahman. That would make sense. But the way sometimes he describes it makes it seem like there's this Maya and then there's Brahman, and Maya's projecting on Brahman, making it dualistic. But I understand the core thing. I just not really fear, but I guess there could be some misunderstanding. But with all these examples, hopefully it's to help people better understand what Advaita Vedanta is. And I think for the most part it does, because again, I understand it all. Watching many people describe it helps me out a lot. And I will say one quick thing real quick. I'm listening to Sadhguru's Karma book while I'm driving to work and back and stuff. When I drive around, I don't listen to the radio anymore. I need to buy some more audiobooks from Gurus and Swami so I can listen to them as I drive everywhere. I'm to his question part, and I love how he describes karma. He describes it as software, and that makes a lot of sense, but I still got to hear more about how to incorporate that so that I can, if I were to ever talk to someone about it, I can explain it as best I can. Anyway, let's go and get back to the video.
This question is from Herman Gomez, who's in Colombia. We in the West are more familiar with the terms soul and spirit. From your lectures, I understand that the soul can be equal in Vedanta to the subtle body, whereas the spirit seems more like the pranic part of it, the vital forces. Is it so, or are those identical things? Would you please explain which is the closest concept in Vedanta to those terms and expand on it? In line with that concept, you assert that the subtle body is the one which transmigrates and is born anew in another physical body. Why then did Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj in his teachings say that reincarnation is nonsense, that it is impossible, and refused to talk about it?
All right. So I'll break up this answer to Herman in three parts. First, I'll describe the Vedantic worldview, especially the Vedantic view about the human personality. And then in the second part, I'll relate it to spirit and soul, the word spirit and soul. And the third, finally, quite separately, we'll deal with what Nisargadatta Maharaj had to say. So first of all, how does Vedanta understand the human personality? A trichotomous, three-layered, to put it in the simplest possible terms, there is this physical body, and there is a subtle body, and beyond that there is the Atman, the real I, the existence, consciousness, bliss, the self, which is the reality. So the Atman, and it has a subtle body, and it has a physical body. So the physical body is not you, it's a body. Even the subtle body is not you, it's a body. And if you actually, for the sake of completion, I must add there's a causal body. The causal body is nothing but ignorance about our real nature. So there's a causal body, the subtle body, and a physical body. And again, none of this is actually theoretical. It's directly observable. Physical body, everybody can observe. What your doctor checks up is a physical body. What you see or others can experience is a physical body. But the subtle body, how would you differentiate the subtle body from the physical body? The subtle body is first-person experience. You experience it yourself. It's private to you. Nobody else can experience your thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories. So those experiences which you have, even the neuroscientists can experience only they can scan the brain and find the neural correlates of your memory, of your thoughts and your perceptions. But your thoughts, perceptions, feelings, memories, that constitutes your subtle body, which everybody experiences. And it makes sense to make this division between physical body and subtle body. From the perspective of our experience, clearly these are two different kinds of things. But the subtle body is also a body, it's not you. You are the witness consciousness of that. In between there is a causal body. So causal body, subtle body, physical body. This is the Vedantic division. Stula Sharira, Sukshma Sharira, Karana Sharira. And they are bodies. And all of that is lit up is animated by the presence of you, the consciousness, which is quite separate from all of these. Now, how do you relate this to... And by the way, the three bodies can also be further analyzed into the 5 sheets, the so-called 5 sheets of the human personality. The food sheet is the physical body. Physical body is the food sheet. Stula Sharira is the Annamaya Kosha. The subtle body, there are 3 sheets there. There is the pranic body, and there is the mental body, and then the intellect body. Or the pranic sheet, mental sheet, intellect sheet. The pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha. All 3 constitute the subtle body, Sukshma Sharira. And then there is the Anandamaya Kosha, the bliss, so-called bliss sheet, which we experience in deep sleep or in Samadhi, which is always there. That is the innermost. Innermost means in the sense closest or subtlest to the Atman. The Anandamaya Kosha, which is the causal body. So this is the structure according to Vedanta. Now, if you try to compare it with spirit and soul, so you have to go back to Christian theology and before that, Greek theology, Greek philosophy, the Greek worldview. So pneuma, which is literally means breath, that came to be known as spirit. And the soul is what corresponds to the subtle body. So you can see it is a bit of a cross-reference here. The subtle body, in the Vedantic perspective, the subtle body includes the prana, the spirit. The pranamaya kosha is a part of the Sukshma Sharira. The subtle body, the vital sheath is a part of the subtle body. So in the Vedantic perspective, the spirit, which you call the spirit, the vital breath, the vital air, that would be part of the soul. That's what leaves the body at death. The soul and spirit together. But in modern usage, both soul and spirit, the words in English today, both soul and spirit, as you can see, they're very ambiguous. In Vedanta, this ambiguity is not there. They're very clear references, the very clear meaning of each term. But in modern English, when we say soul and spirit, it refers to so many things. When you say the soul has left the body at death, the soul has gone to its God, you're talking about the subtle body, sukshma sharira. The physical body is dead. The soul has left. That's the individual being, the sentient being, behind which all of it is, by the way, the Atman in the Vedantic perspective. The soul has left the body. Now, in the Vedantic perspective, the prana, which is what is meant by spirit here, is part of that soul. So when the soul leaves the body, the prana, the vital forces also leave the body. That's what makes the body a dead body, when the life goes out of the body. But in modern English, spirit, the word spirit also refers to the ultimate reality, the Atman. Soul also refers to the ultimate reality, Atman. There are no other words in English to refer to the ultimate, the real self. So the real self, Atman, sometimes we see it's called the soul, it's called the spirit. So the word spirit has two meanings. Technically, the old Greek meaning, and I think the Latin meaning also, was vital forces, breath. You're right there. The modern meaning, in the general way spirit is used in day-to-day life, it just means our spiritual self. That which goes to God, maybe part of God or stays with God or whatever. And the word soul is also used in that ambiguous way. So, for example, save our souls. I commend this soul to God. He was a good soul. A good soul talks about certain characteristics of the subtle body. The subtle body, there are characteristics of being virtuous, unselfish, truthful, and disciplined. This is a good soul. You're talking about the personality, characteristics of the personality. But when you talk about soul and God, you're talking about the Atman, the inner self. So that ambiguity is created by the various meanings of the word spirit and soul. Finally, we come to Nisargadatta Maharaj, who says, I don't know what the reference is, but if he says that, I can quite believe it, that he says that reincarnation is nonsense and impossible. So what is reincarnation in the Vedantic perspective? There are any Indian perspective except the materialist, whether the Buddhist or the Vedantic or the Jaina, Sankhya, any kind of Indian perspective, the physical body obviously dies. The claim is that the subtle body does not die with the physical body. It was not born with the physical body. It only animates and enlivens the physical body. Once the physical body is dead, the subtle body goes on. It's basically the subtle body leaving the physical body, which is physical death. So the subtle body goes on, and karma gives it newer bodies to inhabit in future lives. So this subtle body, sukshma sharira, this is going from body to body to body. This is called reincarnation, punarjanma. Now remember, all of this Advaita Vedanta, from an Advaitic perspective, which is what Nisargadatta was, a non-dualist. From an Advaitic perspective, all this is a convenient fiction, only to experience the way we look at the world, only to explain that. It's a convenient fiction. It is not to be ultimately taken seriously, because from an Advaitic perspective, from Nisargadatta's perspective, there is only one reality, which is Brahman, the Absolute. So the Absolute or Brahman, pure consciousness, and again, be careful when you read. I know when people read Nisargadatta, and I've read him in English, but he originally spoke in Marathi. So it has been translated into English and you will find two words, awareness and consciousness. So Nisargadatta says at death, or at the, when the body dies, that's it, that's the end. Consciousness also dies. So a non-dualist an Advaitin might become surprised. What is he saying? Consciousness dies? Isn't it the whole perspective, the whole program of Advaita to prove that consciousness exists, is immortal? It's just a translation problem. Because you will notice immediately after that, Nisargadatta says, so consciousness dies and only awareness is left. So it is basically what we call consciousness. We are translating Chaitanya as consciousness. There it is being translated as awareness. But anyway, just a terminological difference. From Nisargadatta's point of view, this whole idea of a world and a body and incarnation and reincarnation, all of this is a convenient fiction. How can the one reality, the absolute, which is, for him, it's the only reality. How can that be born? How can that go from life to life? It's an impossibility. And that's why he says that from the ultimate perspective, from his perspective, there is no such thing as reincarnation. And I have told you the story earlier about a monk, one of our monks, who was worried about this question about that the Indian religions say there are many lives, life after life after life. You're born and reborn, reincarnation is there, punarjanma in Hindi or Sanskrit. But the Semitic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they say that there is only one life. You're born, you did not exist earlier, and you die. You will eternally exist afterwards, but there's no more further birth. So, one life or many lives? Reincarnation or no reincarnation? That was the concern of this monk. And very soon people in the ashram became tired of his arguments, so he took his whole dialectics and debate outside the ashram to another ashram nearby. This was in Uttarkashi, in the Himalayas. So that ashram belonged to, there lived a great non-dualist master. So this Swami went there and said, Master, many lives or one life? Punarjanma hai ya nahi? Is there reincarnation or not? And that monk replied, I'll tell you what he said in Hindi and then translate it into English. He said, Are Mahatma ji, जब एक जन्म ही नहीं है तब पुनर्जन्म काहे का? आप मांडुक्य पढ़िए. Swami, Mahatma ji, when there is not even one birth, where is the question of rebirth? You haven't been born to begin with. How can you be reborn? Go and read the Mandukya Upanishad. And that Swami came back and told me in exasperation, it's no use arguing with these non-dualists. They'll all immediately go to Brahman and Mandukya, and that's the end of the argument. So that's where Nisargadatta was coming from. Yes.
I mean, that makes sense, from understanding completely from Advaita Vedanta the fact that everything's Brahman and everything else is Maya or Leela, a play. Nothing exists. I'm making a bit of an assumption here, assuming that only Brahman exists, only pure consciousness, pure awareness exists. Then yeah, there's no such things as rebirth, no such thing as reincarnation, no such thing as essentially anything else, because everything is Brahman, so there is no rebirth. From that perspective alone, yeah, I understand where he's coming from. And I think even whenever I made that statement, as in, I think actually a lot of people say once you become aware, once you become enlightened or aware, that you escape the rebirth, reincarnation. But I do believe that your subtle body still continues on, but you are no longer tied to reincarnation. So. But yeah, I don't believe in reincarnation. But I guess that's all I have to say. I mean, so I guess just to reiterate real quick, like, yeah, in terms of ultimately, there is no reincarnation. Kind of like how I said, like, I made a statement then, if there is only Brahman, that means karma doesn't really exist. And it's like, for the most part, yes. Once you come to enlightenment or realization, all of these things do not exist. Let me know. Am I wrong?
Now this is from Asif Hussain. I have been following you since my college days, and a question has always bothered me. How do I make your teachings relevant in a world full of chaos? One has to deal with the social question of identity, community-based latent isolation, noisy urbanization, and lastly, one's aspiration, which is being glass-shielded by one's birth. How shall I liberate myself from these by following your teachings? Would that not be a part of nihilist escapism?
I'm not sure what you mean by glass shielded, but I get the general tone of the question. So, being a non-dualist, an Advaitin, would it mean escapism? Would it mean nihilism, that nothing exists, or this world doesn't exist? At the very least, the world doesn't exist. And there is so much trouble in the world, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to sit in meditation or just sit quietly and think nothing exists. That doesn't seem very satisfactory.
And this is the reason why, again, like, whenever I come to find out that Advaita Vedanta is kind of like that, and don't get me wrong, I like the idea that they still push for you to be a good human being, regardless of whether this world exists or not. And this is the reason why my perspective is the fact there is still the ultimate reality in the terms of that I can understand and experience it, which is, you could say that everything is Brahman. And I have no issue with that. Everything in this, everything that exists is made out of something. And you can say whatever that something is that exists, and everything that exists is Brahman. Perfectly fine. I am made out of Brahman. My consciousness, everything that functions in me and everything in the world is Brahman. But I also like to believe, again, this is something that I believe Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda pushes, is the fact that this world is real as well. Because there can be some extreme people out there who says, oh, this is all fake, then I can do whatever I want and not suffer any consequences, and I don't like that. But to say that this world is real as well, and that even the ultimate reality is real, that way that people don't just say, well, okay, if this is real, then I have to take this seriously. That's kind of, again, mind you, this is extremes point of views. Kind of like you have any religious extremes. People who take their religion too far, too extreme, will justify their actions like, this is what God wants me to do, and they'll do bad things thinking that they're doing it for the good. There's just people out there who takes things to the extreme, no matter what religion, no matter what way of life they believe in, and that's a big problem that I have. So this is the reason why also that it's very difficult to talk to someone and saying, oh, this is fake, this is all fake. They're gonna like, what are you talking about, man? I feel this every day, I experience this every day. So I don't want to speak to them in that way. And also, I do believe this life to be real, all the things that we experience to be real, and it's not fake, so far, because that's what's majority of people's experience. That's not to take away from the fact that yes, you can also experience bliss or the blankness of, I don't know if you can experience Atman. That's something that's been like, I'm not sure. They say that you can, but then you're saying that the Atman cannot be the object, so therefore you cannot experience it. But then at the same time, there's some things where like the Brahman is the subject and the object, which is like, it's kind of weird. It's like, how do you justify that? Then if it is the subject and the object, that can make some sense, like the dream. But then you have to be able to say that it is also an object that you can experience. Therefore, it makes a lot more sense, So making this reality real as well. But yes, I like to say that there's still the absolute reality that exists, and there's still the objective reality which still exists.
No, Advaita Vedanta is not escapism. I again and again repeat what I heard from, or I read actually from a monk who said in Hindi, वेदांत व्यवहार को मिटाने के लिए नहीं है, वेदांत आपको व्यवहार में निर्बाध बनाता है. Vedanta, Advaita, is not for wiping out your experience of the world. It's not for erasing transactions in the world, erasing activity in the world. No, not for that. It makes you limitless in your experience of the world. Limitless in the sense of you are fearless. You you are completely fulfilled when you go out and interact with the world. So, Vedanta is not for erasing or stopping your experience of the world. There is one kind of spirituality which tries to do that. I will retreat into a mountain cave. I will not interact with society. I'll shut down all interactions because interactions are the source of sorrow. Advaita Vedanta says, no, no, no. Interactions are not the source of sorrow. The world is not the source of sorrow. In fact, samsara itself is not the source of sorrow. Think about it. The enlightened people, they lived in this world. Even the body is not a source of sorrow. Even the mind is not a source of sorrow. What is the source of sorrow? According to Advaita Vedanta,
Ignorance?
the source of sorrow is ignorance.
Saw that one coming. But I do understand what he means by that. I had something to say about I'll make a bit asterisk on what I'm about to say here. I do believe Advaita Vedanta is an escapism, but an escapism of sorrow only. Not of the world, not of your responsibilities, not of any actions that you do, but just of your suffering. That is it. It's an escapism of suffering. Maybe escapism is not the right word, but it's a way to get out of suffering. So escape, maybe. But yes, it's not an escape of reality, not escape of your responsibility, not escape of your actions, but an escape of suffering.
Ignorance about our real nature as Brahman. Once you realize what Brahman is, that I am Brahman, you realize this, then this world and this body and the same mind will no longer be a source of sorrow for you. Will no longer be a source of chaos or trouble. So, Advaita Vedanta does not want you to erase your experience of the world. It does not want you to erase your experience of the mind also. It does not want you to shut down the mind. No. The mind must think, the intellect must understand, and you must interact with the world. But what Advaita wants us to do is to realize what all of this is really. It is Brahman. It is one existence, consciousness, bliss. Having realized that, the same world continues. When you open your eyes after enlightenment, if you have eyes, if you have a body, you have the world also which you can see. If you have a body, then the mind is also there. The mind will think. So all of that will go on. Does Advaita want you to cease interacting with the world? Does it want you to stop dealing with the problems of the world? Absolutely not. That's what Arjuna wanted to do in the Gita, and Krishna told him quite the opposite. That you have to pursue your duty in the world, do your duty in the world, do your activities in the world, but now with a spiritual perspective. Earlier doing it with a worldly perspective, now you do it with a spiritual perspective. You see the iniquities, the sufferings, and the injustice in the world. Why would you turn your eyes away from it? Rather, if you feel motivated to do that, you engage in it, and Vedanta will help you there. Vivekananda gives us some criterion of the truth. So if it strengthens you, accept it as the truth. If it weakens you, reject it as poison. If it is selfish, it is untruth. If it is unselfish, it is true. If it divides and separates, it's untrue. That which unites, brings everybody together, is truth. These are tests of truth, strength or weakness, selfish or unselfish, one or divided, unity or division. These are strength. These are like a litmus test. And based on this, engage in activity. Vedanta encourages you to bring about unity and not disunity. Vedanta encourages you to be altruistic and self-sacrificing and unselfish, selfless. The small self has to be overcome because that's what ties us to samsara. All that Vedanta tells you, your real self is limitless. So that is selflessness. Vedanta gives you strength to engage in your... So you want to be an activist, for example, and fight against injustice in society, if you are motivated to do that. Vedanta will give you strength to do that. I am reminded of Gandhiji, who struggled for India's freedom, who struggled for reformation of society against the caste system, who struggled for education and equity in society, all sorts of things. An enormously busy person. You can just think about, I was just Once I saw the complete works of Mahatma Gandhi in Almiras, in the library in our ashram, and I believe he's written more than 100 volumes. The complete works of Mahatma Gandhi comes in more than 100 volumes. Can you imagine a person writing so much in the midst of so much activity? And yet quite serene, quite happy, having all the time for people, peaceful and sweet and loving. How is that possible? It's because he was grounded in spirituality. So whether it's Vedantic spirituality or any other kind of spirituality, it will give you strength and it enables you to engage with the world, not to run away from the world. But you notice I have been saying, if you so choose, if it motivates you. Why I'm saying that is, you cannot make it a rule that a spiritual seeker or an enlightened person must be engaged with society. Need not be. It could be like Raman Maharshi, who might stay in a cave all his life, and yet his teachings and his presence radiates across the world even today. Isn't that a great benefit to society? It is a very great benefit to society. Swami Vivekananda said, there might be even other enlightened persons who are not even known. At least Raman Maharshi is very well known now. But who might not even be known. But even that the very fact they existed, and they thought, Swami Vivekananda's words, they thought 5 thoughts for the welfare of humanity, and that penetrates to the walls of their caves and it lives in the thought world, and it will do good to humanity. Nothing can stop it. So, an enlightened person is a blessing to humanity, whether that person is actively active or withdraws from society and stays in an ashram or a cave, but still, just because the person is enlightened is a great blessing to humanity. So you cannot make it a rule. You cannot make it a rule that an enlightened person or even a spiritual person must be an activist. May not be. There's no rule for an enlightened person. Okay.
This question comes from Sri Ram, who's in India. I am learning from listening to you that the ultimate reality is Brahman, but at the transactional level, the world exists. This world borrows existence from Brahman. What does this mean? Even an enlightened being sees the world when he comes down to the transactional level. So can't we say that this world is real and consciousness is also real? Why should something exist in all states of mind to be real? How can subjective experience be used to prove existence or non-existence of an object? Let's say if I don't experience a city which I haven't seen, does it mean it doesn't exist?
Again, some of the questions Swami here does a very good job re-explaining. But yeah, I mean, obviously you can say that maybe it does. If a lot of people say it does, you can with some certainty that it does exist. You cannot say, oh yeah, I know without a shadow of a doubt that this city exists, because you've never been there. As a matter of fact, when you book a flight, you can say, I don't know if I'm flying to whatever city I'm going to. I'm just hoping this plane takes me there, and hopefully it exists. Otherwise, I am going in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to Bermuda Triangle. I don't know, the disappearance place. But yeah, and even then, it's kind of hard to. If you land there, he's like, well, I hope this is the city. In fact, I landed in, and I guess you just have to ask around. It's like, am I in this city? Or if you're able to drive there and you look at the sign saying that this way to that city that you're trying to go to, plot it on the GPS and it says that's the city. I mean it's kind of, I don't know, is it kind of hard to say that all these signs that are pointing to the city, I think they're lying to me. I think these are all just lies. They put in the GPS, it says the same direction. I think that's the GPS is lying to me. You can say that honestly, but drive there to prove it. You can say, you cannot say that it is true or false neither way until you know for a fact. You go there and you say, I am now here and this is in fact the city, or this is not in fact the city. again, personal experience. But obviously, there are certain things that we can accept to a certain degree of reality. That that your neighbors exist. I don't see my neighbors right now, but I think they do exist. Hearing random sounds. Obviously, that's not just a speaker, close by my window, being played. It's probably my neighbors.
All right, there are multiple questions here which Sri Ram has asked. First of all, let me say yes. Just because we don't see something, it doesn't mean that that thing does not exist. That's not in the sense in which Advaita Vedanta says everything is in consciousness. That's the problem. The moment we hear Advaita Vedanta says everything is in consciousness, we think, this consciousness, this is what I'm thinking, so everything has to be in this. Not necessarily. I mean, it's obviously not true. We are sitting here, I'm looking at people, it's a brilliant day outside. Is Central Park there if I'm not seeing it? Yes, I hope it's there. So it's the entire world exists even when I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, I just walked past by that park, and last time I saw it, about 5 minutes ago, it was there. I hope it's still there.
The individual person, the individual knower, the individual subject experiences some objects at any one time. All the other objects still do exist. This is why Shankaracharya attacks the Buddhist idealists in his refutation of different points of view to the Buddhist Vijnanavadi. The Vijnanavada Buddhists were subjective idealists. By subjective idealism is meant exactly the kind of question Sri Ram is asking. That they believed everything exists in the mind. That other than the mind, there is no independent existence of anything. So when I'm seeing all these objects, they are all in the mind. Even the body is in the mind. Even the brain is in the mind. The mind is the only thing that exists. And the mind is a series of flashes of cognitions called Vijnana. So all that exists is this series of flashes of cognition. And they admit that different series exist in parallel. So we have all different beings, and each of us is a series of cognitions. And the so-called objects which we experience, they are objects, but they are objects in the mind. And there's nothing outside. Very similar to what Bishop Berkeley, the subjective idealist who lived about 400 years ago, he talked about the world is in the mind. And there is no evidence for anything being outside the mind. Shankaracharya did not agree with this. Advaita Vedanta does not agree with this. Advaita Vedanta says, the individual knower, as we know ourselves to be, the object is independent of you. You are interacting with the object. This view in Advaita Vedanta is called Srishti Drishti Vada. The Srishti, the external universe, it exists. It has been created by God, let us say, Saguna Brahman. And we, the individual experiencer, we come and we experience this world. So that's there. It's not subjective idealism. This might be surprising for many people who have heard me speak. No, this is the Advaitic position vis-a-vis subjective idealism of the Vijnanavada Buddhists. That's why Shankaracharya takes a lot of effort, makes a lot of effort to refute the Vijnanavada Buddhist arguments. Vijnanavadi says, everything is inside. The simple question Shankaracharya asks is, if everything is inside, where did we ever get the concept of an outside? I can think of a clock in my mind, and there's a clock outside. Vijnanavadi says that the clock, it only seems to be outside. What is outside is also inside your mind. But then why do I have the distinction of outside and inside at all, if there's no real outside? So things like that.
I was going to say, it sounded like a lot of my own arguments about how everything must exist in consciousness in your own mind. So therefore, it only ever exists in your mind or in your consciousness. If it doesn't exist in your consciousness, it doesn't exist at all. And that's not to say that, I guess maybe it might. Like, I'm in this room, so everything in this room exists. Well, not everything. I can't see what's behind me. So technically, in my mind, that does not exist, or at least I'm not experiencing it. Perhaps that's the best way to say it. And obviously, my neighbors, I can't see them, so I'm not experiencing them. They're not in my consciousness, because whatever I'm seeing is what I'm experiencing in my consciousness at the moment. I don't know if that's to say that because I'm not experiencing it in my consciousness, therefore it does not exist. It, in some sense, it is, because obviously I'm only ever experiencing now and what I'm able to experience. Anything that I'm not experiencing, it does not exist in my consciousness, because otherwise the entirety of the world, the universe, and everything must be experienced in my consciousness at this moment. But it's not. I'm only ever experiencing this room. Like, and that's why I was like, whenever it's like, it kind of sounds like my explanation, but at the same time, I guess I never said whether my explanation still confirms the existence of things outside of your experience. Which I would say yes, but at the same time, because you're not experiencing it, it does not exist. That's a bit confusing. It's a contradictory, the fact that I say yes, it does exist, but because you're not experiencing, so technically it doesn't exist in your experience, in your consciousness at that moment.
But what Advaita Vedanta is saying, you the knower and the object that you know, both are appearances in one underlying consciousness which you are. You the knower, if you would investigate yourself, you are not just this body-mind. As a body-mind, you experience an external. The moment you are a body, there are external bodies apart from you. We have no doubt about that. But in awareness, the mind appears, the body appears, and everything else experienced through the body-mind also appears. Swami Vivekananda puts it this way: one only exists. It appears as nature, soul. You can put it in more philosophical language. Consciousness only exists, or Brahman only exists. It appears as object and subject. Who is the subject? You are a subject.
Who's the object? You are the object.
Does the object exist in me, the subject? No.
Oh.
You and the object both exist in that absolute reality which is Brahman. The one thing that we do not know right now is that we are that absolute reality. What we feel is, I am a subject and here is an object. So the whole battle between the realists and the idealists in the philosophical sense. The realist says, the object exists independent of me, the subject. The object is there, I come and experience it. I see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it. But even if I were not there, the object would still be there. That's the realist point of view. And that's most fashionable in modern philosophy because of the success and power of science. The idealist says, like Bishop Berkeley, that no, only the subject exists, and what you think is an object out there is only existing in your mind, the mind of the subject. So that's the idealist point of view. Both the realist and the idealist are wrong from the absolute point of view, which is the Advaitic perspective. Subject, object are both appearing in consciousness. You can take a realist perspective and then you as the subject investigate yourself. What am I? You will come to the absolute reality. And from that absolute reality, yes, there everything is in that absolute reality, or is nothing apart from that absolute reality. So that is the answer, yes.
This is from Fahad Jalali, who's in Germany. Does our brain create consciousness? How can I be sure that consciousness is not a product or function of the brain? How can I test to see if awareness is something manufactured by the brain? Some believe that a deeper understanding of brain chemistry will provide the answers. Others look to quantum physics. The minute microtubules found inside nerve cells could create quantum effects that might somehow contribute to consciousness. Some explore computing theory and believe that consciousness emerges from the complexity of the brain's processing. As I understand, the brain is responsible for the content of consciousness. There is ample evidence for a strong correlation between what goes on in the brain and what goes on in the mind. But how can we be sure that the brain is not responsible for experience itself, the capacity for consciousness?
Now, this is a really good question. And the problem is, I guess, kind of both ways for me, is the fact that, well, for science, it hasn't been quite proven. There's strong, maybe, evidence for it, but it's not like concrete. Again, it's like the proof is stacking up, but it's not enough, and that proof may not prove it anyway. It may have some indication, but may not be proof. And for me, it's kind of like, again, with also Advaita Vedanta, it's very difficult to say, this is all Brahman. In terms of consciousness, if I'm understanding that correctly. Brahman, from my terminology, is more, you could say, scientific based, I guess, kinda. Not really. But just to say that existence itself is Brahman, I can accept that. But to say it's pure consciousness, it's very difficult for me to understand it, because I can't, because there's so many ways I can take that, as in consciousness in our mind, therefore, everything that we experience is our own, everything that we experience manifests in our consciousness, so therefore everything is consciousness. But it's not that our consciousness is this big consciousness that exists called Brahman, and that we're all little pieces of that consciousness in some sense, or we think we're pieces of that consciousness, but it's all just Maya, an illusion. We think that we are individuals, but in reality we are not. But with that, I don't know how to prove that, even to experience that. You could say, doing the yogas, listening or reading all this, the only way to know it for sure is by experiencing it. But even then, I don't know if I could go that far. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, you have to do that to in some sense, to end suffering. And perhaps that's just my goal. It'd be great if I can experience that, to know that without a doubt. But I don't think I can get there. Again, just saying I don't think doesn't mean saying, oh, it definitely cannot. No, it's not that. It's just I don't think I can get that way, but it'd be nice. Again, ultimately the goal is to end suffering, which that's the question I need to ask them, is that must you be enlightened to end suffering, or can you end suffering without being enlightened? The only proof that I can say that you can end suffering without being enlightened is perhaps bhakti. Because I don't know if bhakti people are enlightened, because there is a sense of duality of just being devoted to God and just praising God, doing everything for God, and accepting the things that happen to you in some sense. Of course you can make changes and whatnot, but it's just the fact that I don't know if bhakti people are enlightened, but it's they say it's the quickest way to enlightenment. Or is it the quickest way to end suffering? I can't remember. Let me know. Is it the quickest way to enlightenment, or is it the quickest way to end suffering? Can bhakti get you to enlightenment? Actually, yes. I believe that is what Sri Ramakrishna did not? He was fully devoted to, is it Kali, I believe? Then he became enlightened. But can you say praise God? Perhaps not the full. Anyway, I'm asking too many questions, and I wasn't meant to talk too much. Let's go ahead and continue. Sorry.
Well, that is the question, isn't it? Does the brain produce consciousness? That is the question, and that's what David Chalmers is called the hard problem of consciousness, and that's what we hear from scientists. And the term has come to be in current usage now, the hard problem of consciousness. What is the hard problem, and why is it a hard problem? Why is it that there's a doubt that the brain produces consciousness, which is where the question is coming from. When scientists scan the brain, we have extraordinarily subtle instruments nowadays. So when you scan the brain, what you see is minute electrical activities in the brain, the blood flow in the brain, the minute electromagnetic activity in the neurons in the brain. You don't see consciousness. If you say the brain produces consciousness, then it must be in a very strange and unique way. When you say something produces something, it should be observable, right?
And here's the only thing I have to say. It's kind of like, again, science is very, very young still. And in the past, they didn't know anything about any kind of surgeries or brain activity or anything like that. It's the limitation of technology we have at current times. So I'm not saying that, oh yeah, in the future they'll definitely find consciousness, but I have to come to the middle ground to where, like, maybe the technology is not enough, or maybe no matter how far technology goes, it will never be found. I'm open to both of those. There's just don't know. Like Sadhguru always pushes, like there's a power to I don't know, and that's the thing that I have. Like, I'm not saying that science will definitely find it. I'm not saying science will never find it. It's just I understand right now science is very young, and maybe the technology is not that good enough to detect that, or maybe we are detecting that, we just don't know that's the consciousness. It's anything.
If the productive processes are observable, the product also must be observable. So when you look at this at the factory producing cars, you can observe the raw materials going into the factory. You can observe the process of production, the raw materials being converted, the parts being put together in the assembly line. And you can observe the car, the final product coming out. That's also observed. But when you observe the brain, you observe processes. You observe blood flow, electrical activity, electromagnetic activity, certain neurochemical activity. All of these are observable. But where is the car at the end? Where is the consciousness at the end? Is that observed? No. Nothing at the end of it. Only thing that's observed is more and more electrical activity. Is consciousness observed? No. Is it observable at all in principle? No. And that's the interesting thing. Those who are completely reductive, say Daniel Dennett, for example. So Daniel Dennett would say consciousness is the firing of C fibers in the brain. The firing, electrical activity of certain neurons and certain structures in the brain, that is consciousness. There's nothing more to it than that. That does not seem to be very satisfying. If you say that consciousness is just the brain, without explaining how the brain produces it. You say, don't say that it produces consciousness, it is the brain. Now, it's like a person sitting on the branch and cutting up the branch you're sitting on. You are sitting on conscious experience. All that we have in life is conscious experience. Now, to explain how conscious experience comes, we have to show every step of the way. You can show us the brain, you can show us the neuronal activity, the neurochemical activity, show us the electrical activity in the neurons, and then, next, nothing. Where is consciousness? So this is called the hard problem of consciousness. There seems to be a jump. As he has said, multiple attempts at trying to explain the hard problem of consciousness. There is microtubules. I think Sir Roger Penrose, who got the Nobel Prize this year, I think, he has proposed microtubules in the nerve cells in the brain, which might have quantum effects to produce consciousness. Might. Mm-hmm. But there's obviously no evidence of that. David Chalmers would say it is not possible in principle. Whatever is material will produce something else that is material, not the observing consciousness itself. Some have said a computational model. In fact, the latest theories by Tonini, the integrated information theory, the complexity of the activities of the brain generate consciousness. Every other week I see an article in some science journal or some popular website, mystery of consciousness solved. And when you look closely at it, every one of them will have its favorite candidate, microtubules, quantum effects, computational model, complexity of brain activity. Everybody has a favorite candidate to solve the problem of consciousness. But in every article you will see there is a jump. At one point, suddenly consciousness appears. There is no clear link between what was being talked about, whether it is quantum states or microtubules or the computational model and consciousness. There's a jump. I'm reminded of that cartoon, which I had seen quite a long time back. One scientist is writing on the blackboard, probably a graduate student, is writing on the blackboard, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3 are full of mathematical equations, and 5 is again full of mathematics. But in 4, it's written a miracle. And his guide, maybe the professor who's guiding him, is telling the graduate student, it's good, but I think you need to work on step 4. As somebody put it, the miracle of, the biblical miracle of water turning into wine. We understand water, we understand the wine. But how water turns into wine, we don't understand. So we understand brain. And consciousness also we understand directly from our own experience, because we are conscious. We understand that. But how this activity of the brain produces consciousness, we don't understand. The philosopher Galen Strawson, who's in Texas. Recently, Professor Arindam Chakravarti told me that he's actually the son of a very famous Oxford philosopher, Peter Strawson, Sir Peter Strawson. So, like father, like son. So, Galen Strawson, he's written this article about the sort of tongue-in-cheek, about the hard problem of matter. He says there is no hard problem of consciousness really. What is the real problem here? We have made up our minds that consciousness has to be reducible to the brain, because we have sort of made up our minds matter is the only reality. So everything has to be explained in terms of matter. Matter, energy, time, space. We have to explain in material terms. Therefore, if you come across something like consciousness, which we are always there, consciousness, we have to explain it in terms of matter. So we have to explain it in terms of the brain. We have to reduce it into brain states, brain activities, and we can't. And therefore we call it the hard problem of consciousness. What Galen Strawson says is, consciousness is most obvious. The first thing that's obvious to us is consciousness. We are aware. Only after that, we are aware of our bodies, of the world. Only after that, we do science and religion and art and politics. All of this is in consciousness. Everything that we do. Even when we doubt consciousness and we want to reduce consciousness to matter, it's still done in consciousness. So he says, consciousness is beyond doubt. Galen Strawson, he says, consciousness is beyond doubt. It's the first thing we start with. There's nothing prior to that. What is doubtful is matter. He says, as we have investigated matter over the last 100 years or so in physics, in particle physics, matter is vanishing before our eyes. Atoms into subatomic particles, electrons, neutrons, protons into quarks, and quarks into superstrings. Where does it bottom out? Is there any end to it? What does it mean even? And they are so incredibly tiny, and so it's beyond human imagination now. Only mathematics predicts it. So matter itself is vanishing before our eyes.
Real quick. Yeah, I do actually wonder, it's like, where does it bottom out in terms of atom, proton, neutron, then electron, and then whatever else is below? It's like, my gosh, how small is small gonna get? It makes you wonder too, that are we small? Are we just like microscopic things living in a gigantic world that we don't know about just because we're so small we can't see it?
He calls it the hard problem of matter. Yeah, so that is the problem. There is really at this point there is no clear pathway. The whole field of trying to reduce consciousness to the brain, that field has just stalled. Having said that, obviously there are strong correlates between our conscious experience and neural activities. That has been mapped. In fact, that's called the so-called easy problems of consciousness. It's not easy. It requires an enormous amount of training and brain science and technology to map our reports of cognitive experiences and the neuronal activities which correspond to that. So it's a science of correlations. What does it mean? Clearly, it means the brain is strongly involved, is implicated in our conscious experience. Vedanta is actually very compatible with this state of affairs. Every experience is consciousness shining upon an object. The objective side of it, so there's an objective side to every experience. When you say what it feels like, the technical term is qualia, the hard problem of consciousness. Everything feels like something. Why it feels like something is because of consciousness. But it feels like something. That like something must be objective. And that like something part of it is contributed by the world, by the senses, by the brain. Even the mind. According to Advaita Vedanta, even the mind is material. So one day you will be able to find the brain and the mind, how the brain and the mind interact. But both are material. What Advaita Vedanta calls consciousness is beyond the mind. It shines on the mind, illumines the mind. What modern neuroscience calls consciousness is basically mixed up with the mind. There is no clear distinction between mind and consciousness in modern neuroscience. Okay. I think we should bring it to a close here. We have run out of time. Thank you, Diane.
Swami.
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.
Okay, for me about that, I mean, even if our consciousness is just microtubules or some quantum whatever, it's irrelevant. The whole point, I guess, for me is just to find out what the truth is. It's nice to know. It's not going to change how I live my life. It's not going to change how we should be ending suffering. It's not going to change how Advaita Vedanta has, I'm sure, helped a lot of people end suffering. Whether consciousness is external, outside the mind and brain, or whether it is in fact microtubules or quantum whatever in our mind, doesn't change the fact of what we can personally experience, or how Advaita Vedanta has helped people. That will not change regardless of where consciousness is. That's kind of the big point about me. It's the fact that, you know, it's best to know the truth, obviously. And this is something that, what he was saying there about, like, people in the past, where we're talking about medicine and stuff. There was a hard point in medicine too, where they could not get past a certain point. You know, they just in World War II, they just chop off limbs just to save people's lives. Now we can actually save the limb and save the person's life at the same time. It's the limitation of the technology of the time, and obviously, you know, we don't have peak technological advancement yet. We're just within maybe a generation or century, maybe. Technology has boomed, but then it slowed down. So we're at, again, also in terms of technology, a certain barrier that we haven't gone past yet until someone discovers something new, maybe quantum mechanics or quantum computing. Until that gets sorted out, it's going to be a barrier, a slow, until we until we discover the next, whatever it may be. Same thing with medicine, you know. Medicine, everything science is young. Technology, like computer science, medical science, whatever science. If it has science in it, it's young. It's not at its prime. Yeah, I don't think it's at its prime. Maybe it might be, I don't know. But I doubt it's at its prime. Our computers are not in its prime. Our doctors, our facilities, our technology, techniques, whatever you want to call it in terms of science, is not at its prime. So it's obviously going to have its limitation. When are we going to hit our prime? I don't know. 1 billion years from now, maybe tomorrow we hit our prime. But you know, it's we don't know. And again, for me, it's irrelevant in the sense of suffering ending. That if the consciousness is external or it's microtubules, doesn't change the fact that we still suffer, and doesn't change the fact that you know, bhakti, jnana, raja, karma yoga can help end our suffering. Advaita Vedanta end our suffering. Following those yogas will help you become a better person. Does not change that. our freaking consciousness could be in our butts and we still have suffering and we still can be better people, irrelevant of where it's at. I just would rather know the truth. Is it going to change my mind? No, again. But I hope that's what most people think. Like, you know, if you believe it's something external from outside the mind, I'm not going to disagree with you because I don't know. From experience, as much as I can experience, maybe in the brain. Could it be outside? It's just about as good as two. And so that's my personal take on that. And I just throughout, I'm just repeating myself. I'm just gonna end the video here. So that's my reaction to Ask Swami. It's ran way over, and hopefully my computer doesn't die processing this. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. Thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.